Great to be here today. I had slides, but I told Suvi earlier today that I probably won't use them because my presentation will change. So this will be a very random and very badly prepared presentation. But I thought that since my topic is building a game versus building a game company, and I may want to make this a bit more real time. So I talk about things that Supercell did differently to many other game companies, and why I think some things worked well, and of course some things didn't work out that well. So very briefly about my own background. So have been an entrepreneur since '97 when I started my first company, and I've sold 2 companies, first Hoppan to Airwide and later Chaiku to Google, and I was 2 years at Google before starting Lifeline with Timo Ahopelto in 2009. And we've invested in 35 very early stage startups. We were in fact the first investor in Supercell and Grand Crew, Grey Area, and many other game companies. We have 8 games investments, and we're doing 1 investment in a Finnish game company at the moment. We should close it pretty soon. So we kind of quite focused on games. We also work on health and advanced technology and web services in general, but games and health are our 2 key areas. So let's move to the topic itself. So the topic was building games versus building games companies, and I'm a gamer, but I haven't been an entrepreneur in games, never. So I was pretty surprised when I started. Like in 2009, I think we invested first in Amplifier, and quite soon after that in Supercell and a few other games companies. Grey Area was one of the first ones, and I've of course seen tens and if not hundreds of, well, tens of game companies, at least in Finland, and I think the biggest challenge is that our companies have is that they are more super talented teams built around a game concept, or at most, let's say, a niche or game genre. But building a real company is really the primary goal for the founders of the team. So that's why I think this topic is a relatively important one. And what's the difference between building a single game and building a game company? So of course, everything starts from the team. And what we've seen is that there are really good technical teams here in Finland, but the biggest bottleneck for game companies is actually the CEO or the commercial founders in the company. So we have very few game company CEOs who would have raised venture capital, especially ones who would have sold their own startup, who would have led a team of tens of employees. Sometimes it's just one of the founders who is elected as the CEO of the company, and he or she may not have any business experience or any management or kind of a real leadership experience. And we've seen that it's usually better, although I'm saying that the CEO is the bottleneck, when one does early stage investments, it's better to not to have a CEO, kind of a traditional CEO at all, than to have an average CEO, because the easiest way to destroy a games company or any kind of startup is to have an average CEO. When you have a real CEO, he or she needs to be world class. That's the only alternative. And now if I promise to give Supercell examples, so if you think about Ilkka Paananen, who is the founding CEO of Supercell, he was the president. He had, I don't know if he technically was the founder of Sulake, but anyway, the CEO of Sumea, but he was the CEO there. He sold the company. He worked for a big US-based games company called Digital Chocolate, in the end being the president of that company, reporting to the CEO, and he was in the board meetings, although he wasn't a member of the board. So, and I think something like 170, 180 persons reported to him. So he was already super experienced, probably like with Matthias and a couple of others, like the most experienced game company CEO in Finland. And even though the company starts always small, there were six founders at Supercell. It's very important that when you have the CEO there, that person is really good in what he or she is doing. If we look at the rest of the team, we've seen that most of the Finnish companies are somehow they just do better if they technically very talented. And this doesn't apply only to games, but also to other startups. We've seen that somehow, I don't know, maybe it's in our DNA or something, but if we have true technological competitive advantage, we seem to be able to compete better than if we have, let's say, marketing skills or business development skills or whatever, something else. There are some exceptions, but in general, for example, because of that, we're looking at the quality of the technical team. And that team, if you want to create a truly world-class games company, you need to benchmark with the best companies out there. And I have to say that in many cases, if I compare the local startups here, and let's say the Silicon Valley-based game companies, I think on average we are much better. The technical teams are much better. Where we may lack something in customer acquisition or these areas, but they actually relatively easy to. These roles are relatively easy to fill if you know what you are looking for, and that's the importance of having a world-class CEO, because that person should know what the company needs and what it lacks, and really kind of looking at the team critically, benchmarking it with others is super important. So if I go back to Supercell's history, the company was first building a Facebook game. Some of you may remember this Gunshine game, and I think it was a really nice game. It was almost like designed for myself, which is usually a big mistake. But it was a wonderful game, not just technically, but I also enjoyed playing it. But it was just done. It was a wrong kind of a game for that market, and the team which built the game actually didn't have. I would say they were really good, but they were not the best team in the world for building Facebook games. They were lacking some critical resources. And then when Zynga was preparing for their IPO, they published this so-called S1 document that describes the company in a very detailed way. So that document was read at Supercell, and we realized that we're not going to be successful in this market. It would have been, we would have just lied to ourselves if we believed that. So we decided to change to a completely different market. And this was a really big decision because just like 3 or 4 months earlier, Axel Partners had invested more than 8 million euros in Supercell. And now we're saying that, hey, actually we need to, what you invested in was wrong. We were wrong. We pitched you hard and we got a really good valuation and you invested a lot of money, but we were wrong. And we were wrong very, very fast after the investment. Luckily, the team kind of just very critically analyzed the various alternatives, and they also figured out their own strengths, and they realized that tablets, the tablet games were kind of interesting, the tablet sales were growing fast, and there was no real leader in tablets. So then they came up with a strategy, tablet first. And I remember when I got an email like, hey, we worked on the strategy and now we have something, and then there was just tablet first and nothing else in the email. And it immediately clicked like, hey, this is a no-brainer. And the first thing that I started doing is just Googling like tablet first and tablet games, and I was amazed that there was nothing there. And then that story was told to the investors. Of course, there were some bad news and then good news. And I have to say that at that point, the good news were not that good. But luckily, the investors they understood and they kind of, I think they appreciated the fact that the company was ruthless to itself and that they were analytical and made tough decisions. And then they started building tablet games. But this requires a lot of kind of self-confidence, and you need to know the company and yourselves really well in order to succeed. The other important thing which is related to this difference between building a game and game company is that Gunshine wasn't actually doing that badly. I think it generated something like $7,000 to $8,000 per day as revenues, and customer acquisition was not that expensive on Facebook. So, I mean, pretty easily the company could have become profitable just running Gunshine, and at the time we were building other games as well using the really beautiful tool chain that the company had created. So Supercell was able to create similar games and even games that looked quite different and where the mechanics were quite different without writing a single new line of code. Everything was configurable, and for example, I invested just in the team and the tool chain when I invested. So I mean, it was very easy to see a company that would have done $50,000 per day being very profitable, but that wasn't the goal for the team or the investors. So it's very important that if you really want to build a company, you set your goals super high. If Supercell had set easier goals, I mean, they would probably still be building Facebook games and being moderately successful. But even the initial goals were very high. So it was relatively easy to make this tough decision and to switch to a new area. Another thing is directly related to this is that, I mean, nowadays everyone is building tablet first mid-core games for a specific audience, and I'm not sure whether that's the right focus today. I think the train has probably gone already. I mean, I was super excited about tablet first because the space was completely empty. But now there's even like more than 10 Clash of Clans clones out there. So do you really want to go there? And now that Supercell launched on Android, they're absolutely killing all the clones. I mean, I'm seeing how the revenue of the clones is actually declining when the Android version of Clash of Clans is just capturing market share increasingly. So, and it's already pretty full market. So if you're now thinking about building a game company, you should really figure out the space. I mean, what's going to be the next interesting space? Is there competition there already? And this means, like, is it really empty? There's nobody there, or there's just very weak companies there. That's kind of the optimal situation. If there are already companies, but you think that you can build a slightly better game, then the market is not very attractive typically. And that's an easy mistake. Like, hey, Clash is very successful, or Angry Birds is successful, but I can do a better game, and I can do better characters than the Angry Birds, so I'll also get billion downloads. So I think that kind of thinking is not correct. And this is really hard. Like, at least I'm not seeing many interesting areas out there. You know, Petteri is working on one of those that I think have potential, and there are a couple of others, but like spaces where nobody is actually doing that well, but that seem pretty interesting and that could potentially be very big. And I have this rule that the probability of succeeding in something is almost constant. Like, if you try something relatively easy, or you try something extremely hard and ambitious, then the probability of succeeding is constant. And this comes from the fact that if you try something extremely ambitious and hard, you usually get the best people working with you. And the best people may attract even better people, and then people get interested because you're trying to do something totally insane or almost impossible. So in the end, you have roughly the same probability of making it, kind of independent of what you do. So that's why I always tell entrepreneurs that you should aim as high as possible, because most likely, I mean, even the failure in this scenario could be a nice exit. Like, even I think when we were building Chaiku, we could say that we failed. We lost to Twitter, but we still were able to sell the company to Google, and we have a couple of other candidates there. So in many cases, failure can be a really attractive outcome to the founders. Then something about the culture as well. When I was younger entrepreneur, I always thought about that these culture things are just mumbo jumbo, like that nobody really cares about corporate culture. Like, I have bigger problems to deal with. But the older and slower I become, the more important this culture thing is becoming. And I'm not saying that there's only a single culture, but if you think about Supercell culture, for example, it's this super low hierarchy, a lot of responsibility to the teams, pretty hard work. Like there are no games, for example, or game rooms at Supercell, and the employees don't want any distractions there. They think that when they come to the office, they work really hard, and then they leave the office and hopefully are able to relax. But there's kind of a very well-defined culture that everyone knows. And if I compare this culture to, let's say, Rovio culture, they're totally different, but both work for the specific companies. So you just have to create a culture that works, and different cultures work for different kind of companies. So of course both companies are extremely successful, but they value different things, and the culture guides the companies. And even if you're doing really well, you have problems that need to be solved on daily basis, and it's not just the CEO or the founders who need to solve these problems, but it's the employees, each and every employee. And if you have a strong culture that everyone knows, then whenever you are in doubt, you can just think about the culture. That hey, okay, we respect freedom and we give a lot of responsibility to employees, so then I should do this in this situation. And one example from Supercell is that when we were creating new games, like the management started thinking that, hey, or asking for deadlines, for example, that the investors are interested in deadlines and what's the roadmap and so on. And we realized that it took many months, but we realized that that this is not actually working. It's against the company culture, and there was all kinds of problems. And then Ilkka and the management team just got together, and they thought that, hey, what would be really what would we do if we would just like literally follow our values and culture? And then he realized that we should actually give complete freedom to the teams. And then he made a rule and actually also held a speech where he said that nowadays from now on you don't have any deadlines. Only the teams can talk about their deadlines, and actually I'm not even interested in those. And nobody can kill the project, so only the teams themselves can kill the project. Or if they launch, then the players can kill a game. Like if the metrics are not good and the game is not good, then the players will kill them. But Ilkka or anybody from the so-called management cannot kill a game project. So this is kind of, and that has worked out. All the teams become much more productive. I don't even know why exactly, but these kind of things just happen if you have a good, there's a good culture that fits well with the company and its goals and people. Then the last part is about the investors. Like if you just create a game, a single game or maybe a couple of games, and that's your passion, I don't think that like VC investors are really, they probably just make your life more painful, to be honest. They have their own exit requirements. They need to be able to sell their ownership in 5 to 8 years, sometimes even sooner. They're looking for huge multipliers. Like if they invest 1 million, they want to get 10 million back, and so on. So for this kind of an indie studio that's really passionate about the specific game type or games, usually VC investors are not a good alternative. There are angels who who may share the same passion for that kind of games, and they usually much better investors for a company or team like this. If you're really ambitious, if you want to create another Rovio or another Supercell or another Remedy, then you should really kind of think like what kind of investors you need in different phases of the company. Like if we think about Supercell's case, for example, first Ilkka and Mikko Kodisoja financed the company by themselves. Then we invested. Then immediately after that, we figured out we need the best game investors out there who are relatively close to Finland, but who have really good connections and insight and so on, so that we don't look too Finnish. Ilkka had really good relationships, but not the best in the world. And then we went to London and approached guys like Paul Hayden back there, and David Gardner and Initial Capital, Christian Segerstrole and Jari Ovaskainen, like people who had really good connections, who were used to early stage investments, who knew about the legal thing, M&A and so on. And that was an extremely good decision. Then maybe 6-9 months later, Axel Partners wanted to invest. We didn't approach them, but they approached Supercell, and they just gave an offer that we couldn't refuse. And they turned out to be a really good later stage investor. And earlier this year, we took, again, much later stage investors like institutional venture partners from the US and Atomico. Niklas Zenström is, of course, from there, the Skype founder, who is very experienced and who was very useful in this SoftBank deal that we did earlier, and so on. So different kinds of investors in different phases. So if I summarize, what's important is to really figure out with the team whether you want to build 1 or 2 games or just games, or whether you want to build a company. The latter alternative is really hard. You need to be able to find a world-class CEO, or maybe you will grow to become a world-class CEO, or maybe you are already. You need to be able to hire the best employees and also fire people. Most likely is that you need to fire one of the co-founders. That happens in most of the startups if you have more than two co-founders. You have to find the best investors. If you are successful, you will end up in a really bloody fight against other companies, whether it's about recruiting or customer acquisition or something. You get lawsuits, you need to deal with those, and so on. So that's the other alternative. So just think about it very carefully. And then if you decide to do the latter, benchmark your team, your ideas, everything with the best companies out there. And as an investor, I hope that there will be tens of game companies in the future, not just excellent game teams. Thank you very much.
So we have 15 minutes of time, or actually 12. Are you willing to take some questions? Is there some topics you don't want to cover?
Yeah, I probably can't talk anything about the Supercell deal that was announced today, but you can ask anything else.
So, is there any questions? Raise your hands so that I can see them. This is a little bit awkward, I have to say. Well, I have one question. How do you feel at the moment?
Yeah, I feel tired and happy, as they say, and concretely. But you know, this was just a strategic partnership that's being formed, so it wasn't kind of end of anything. It's rather like the first big step forward. So the work continues.
So you see it as a good beginning for a new story, or kind of middle way for the old one?
Yeah, but I mean, of course, it feels great to get some kind of closure every now and then. So it's not just struggle all the time, but you reach one milestone and then you can rest for a couple of weeks, and then then we go again.
Okay, so congratulations. I think this has been a great day for us all. And I think you gave us really good points about, you know, what was important in the Supercell strategy. So many of us have secured angel funding and pre-seed and seed in Finland. So if you just recap the points that, you know, when we approach international investors, what should we avoid as Finns and games entrepreneurs and people that tend to be product-oriented, not company-oriented, maybe are very excited about our own tiny little things. So just that, you know, give us advice when we start to talk to investors in Slush, for example, that what makes us more interesting, what makes us better entrepreneurs.
Okay, so one thing, I need to start pretty far from where I probably go, but one thing that's important to understand is that the game market sucks at the moment. Like, investors are extremely disappointed, or have been very disappointed after the Zynga IPO and all the problems there. So if you look at kind of the multipliers of public companies, for example, like what's their valuation compared to their earnings, for example, then games industry is almost like the worst industry out there. And there's no correlation between the growth and of the company and its valuation, for example. So that's why, like, the honeymoon is over. The investors are relatively skeptical about games. So what they need to see is a potential for a really huge profitable business. Because unlike with internet companies like Twitter and Facebook and others, where still the head, like if you have 100 million users or 500 million users, then your company is automatically valuable. If you have a game company that's not profitable and that's not growing fast, and eventually it also needs to be sustainable, so it's not as hit-driven as the companies actually are, then the requirements are really hard. So I would say that the scalability, you need to have early proof for scalability. Like, okay, these metrics are so good that if I add customer acquisition money, I can actually create a very significant business. And then you need some sustainability aspects, like, hey, this core technology that we have, we can use it in the next game, or you have a credible merchandising strategy and a virtuous cycle where you build the brand or something like that. You need to have some relatively unique things that differentiate you from others and that create a sustainable business. Somehow you need to prove it. Of course, with early stage companies, you don't have much. So then 80% is just sales there. But it's the profitability and growth and then sustainability. Those two things, the team and everything is just, they are just components of these two.
So is there some other questions? There is one back there. There is microphone coming. It reaches you in, I estimate, 17 seconds.
My name is Esa Manninen, representing private equity company Midas Equities Ltd. And 20 years ago, I was working for the Northwest Russian private equity fund founded by EBRD. And my task was find deal flow in Russia, including IT companies, and I visited the most important companies and found a couple of game companies also, Nikita, Buka, and other. And we were very close to invest in Nikita company. Could it be for your of interest to invest in Russian game companies?
Why not? But like Lifeline Ventures is really early stage investor, so we want to be very close to the company. So that's why we've only invested in Finnish startups and then some UK and a few UK and few US based companies, because we visit those countries very often and we have business there. So in the future, yes, but at the moment, probably no.
Okay, there is time for 2 small or 1 big one. And I mean questions. I don't see any hands. Well, if there is no questions, thank you, Petteri, and congratulations. It was very nice to have you here.